Welcome to Harvest Mission Community Church. You are listening to one of our sermons.
But today we're going to be talking about family. And I know family could be a very touchy subject for many of us, or some of us have had very good, very positive experiences with our family. But maybe in the ways that our views are shaped about family, it cannot be helpful maybe. And maybe it's not biblical. Maybe it's things that you've learned from your parents because your parents wanted you to stay near to them. But ultimately, what does it look like to biblically look and view family and to respond out of that? And the particular angle that I want to take is being able to specifically talk about the parent-child relationship. I know that some of us have siblings, some of us may not, but at least all of us have had or have parents at different points, and whether that relationship has been severed, whether we have lost our parents, different things, but being able to view this parent-child relationship, because even in the future, as I pray that many of us would become parents, and we'll be investing into this next generation, and many of us would have kids, and being able to know how we could operate and to do it biblically and in a way that could be honoring to God. So when I thought about this topic of family, I have mixed feelings, and like many of us, I'm very grateful for some of the things that my parents have done, or even my relationship with them, because I don't think I've ever experienced too much tumult or chaos or really bad relationship with my parents. But then there are times where I struggled and there was hardships and we would not see eye to eye. And there was a little bit of tension, or I would feel like my relationship with my parents, I just didn't want anything to do with it. And so I'm going to just show us a picture of my family and then my parents. And so that was back in the day. I'm the one with the really cool jacket there. And then on the side, I'm the weirdo with the Friends hoodie. But anyways, in this, my relationship with my parents have evolved over the years, and I'm just really grateful for them in many ways too, because I feel like they really allowed me to live out the call of God, and they didn't really hold me back, or they didn't say, you have to stay in New York, or you got to do certain things. But they were always very understanding, and they really wanted me to pursue the heart of God. But I know that that may not be the case for many of us. Many of us might have pre-Christian parents who don't believe, and sometimes when you're trying to obey God, it becomes a blocker or a resistance against you. Or for some of us, your parents might be Christian, but even when you're trying to obey and follow God, they're actually saying, I don't know if that's what God really wants you to do, but you see it clearly in Scripture. Or some of us just have a really bad, rough relationship with our parents, and it's never been good over the many, many years. And you're still at a place where even on Christmas or different holidays, Mid-Autumn Festival, Chinese New Year, you don't want to go back because you know you're going to have to face up to that problem or that challenge that awaits you back at home. But I wanted to share some general statistics about families that I found in Hong Kong. And this is why I feel like it's so important for us to understand biblically what God intended for families, biblically what our parent-child relationship is supposed to be like, so that we will be able to obey God. Because sometimes we're so dictated about our emotions and feelings and our thoughts towards our parents that that's what keeps us maybe bondage to what they think of us or how we want them to respond. And sometimes that'll lead us to a place where it's not helpful in following God. But some of these statistics, of course, this is more of a secular source and it's a general population. But the first statistic here is an estimated 520,000 residents live in a state of self-isolation within their homes. And so even as they're living with their family, they're living in isolation. They don't want to interact with their parents. They don't want to interact with the people around them. And even for us, maybe we're in that state where we go home and we lock our doors first thing we get in, and we try to find avenues to ignore or brush off our parents. There's also a lot of feelings of inferiority in Hong Kong with children. And so in 2026, Save the Children Hong Kong survey showed that 53.1% of teenagers feel inferior, lazy, or useless due to intense parental comparisons and expectations. And I know many of us, maybe we're not living with our parents anymore. Maybe for some of us, we don't even remember what that was like. And maybe some of us have lived in a very optimistic environment, but a lot of us, if we were to recall, sometimes there's this aspect of we've always been compared to that cousin who went to Harvard, or compared to that person who, someone in our family who's achieving a lot more than we are. And so there's this feeling of inferiority that we get into because of that. There's this aspect of perfectionism. So about 20% of surveyed students report feeling crushing pressure from their parents to be perfect. And even in the city of Hong Kong, we hear a lot about suicides that happen. And that's because of that crushing pressure for them to meet up to this expectation that their parents have for them. There's communication barriers, and so there's sometimes hurtful remarks or invasions of privacy where the teenagers would feel like the parents don't understand them, or there would be always some kind of berating and calling of names. And so it creates this really unsafe, uncomfortable environment. And then this is more in relation to actually divorce or just broken families. But one of the things that people feel once their parents have divorced is future intimacy fears. And so there's been this tracking, and children who reach adulthood, they exhibit significantly lower confidence in intimate relationships. And so they don't want to get married. They don't want to have a family of their own because they saw the brokenness of that. And so for today, I wanted to focus on family because I see all this brokenness, and I know that a lot of us here in our church have experienced brokenness in our families. That even in the past year, maybe you've gotten into some deep conflicts with your parents. And in that, maybe there are some stories, and later on, I'm going to have someone share their story of God redeeming and healing them. But a lot of us are still in the thick of it, that it's been difficult. It's been very hard when they think about their family because there's brokenness, there's loss. It reminds them of pain. It reminds you of struggles. It reminds you of things that you don't want to feel. But I see that it's very imperative for us to recognize and understand God's design for family. That God actually, the first institution he ordained was actually the family. That when he brought Adam and Eve together, that they were to be a family together. And so what does God have to say about it? Because he's the designer of family, and we should want to live in light of that. And so today, the one thing is when we make Jesus the priority, we will approach our relationship with our family honorably. When we make Jesus the priority, we will approach our relationship with our family, our parents, our close ones honorably. So we're going to turn to Luke chapter 14, verses 26. And so when it comes to talking about family, maybe it's a little bit controversial to use this verse, but I'm going to just read it for us, and I want to be able to take away and bring out some of the things that the text is actually saying. So Luke chapter 14, verse 26 is, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple." It is very funny in this room for everyone online because it's so small that someone chuckles and everyone just hears it out. But praise God. But let me read that verse for us again. "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple." The first thing that we see through this passage is the relational priority. That Jesus is making a statement of priorities. He's saying what is most important. And so the concern for the audience that he was speaking to is that there is this cultural aspect to it, and it was the culture at play. For Israelites, the understanding of family was a very important thing. It was such an important thing that it was regarded as one of the things of highest loyalties for them. That the family unit is where they had to put down everything else, and if anything happened with their family, they had to run to their family first. It makes me think about that one person who he asked Jesus, what should I do? I need to go bury my father. And he says, let the dead bury their own. And in that, you see this desire to show loyalty and to show greatest concern. And I'm not saying don't go, if your parents are sick, please attend to them, love on them in that way. But in this, what Jesus is trying to show is that there's this great and highest loyalty to family. And this could presuppose that actually at times people's loyalty to their family was greater than their loyalty to God. So in a lot of the times when certain decisions would come about or how they lived their lives, the way that they viewed their family would cause them to choose their family over maybe the things that God wanted them to do. And we see that throughout the Old Testament scriptures with different parts of different people's stories and how they always put the priority on their family. And that was such an important unit for the Israelites. And even for ourselves, even when I think about Hong Kong, I sort of grew up in a Korean culture where family was an important thing, but also my parents, being believers, they sort of helped me to shift that perspective. But I know for a lot of us, growing up in different cultures, family became this very important thing that your parents pushed on you. They said that above all else, that the family should be the greatest focus for you. And instead of seeing Christ as being the priority, what was often shared is that you should make your family the first thing, that you should neglect everything else that God maybe would ask of you if it would interrupt with the things that family would ask of you. And we've probably all been in those situations. We've probably all been at those moments where there was a tension where we felt, even today, for many of us, maybe your parents are saying, what's wrong with you? Why are you going to go to church on T8? And there's this wondering of why are you putting such a great priority on this God that you serve? And what Jesus is exactly doing here is that he's saying that you need to put me as the highest priority, that my place in your heart should be of the highest point rather than anything else. And then the second aspect that the audience was concerned about is that it was actually written in the law. And so oftentimes, though, the Pharisees would misconstrue the law, or they would not appropriate it or understand what the heart of it was or the spirit of it was, but they would much rather just look at the letter of the law. And so what does the law say? And I just need to obey what the law says. And I'm not saying that we should disregard the law, but what the law said for the Israelites is that to dishonor their parents was considered a capital punishment in that society. So that would mean that they would either get stoned and they would be killed for disobeying their parents, or there was a punishment that would come upon them that it would be really hard for them to bear. And so when they connected this and they looked at their family and they said, should I dishonor my parents? And when they felt tension between that and their relationship with God, and oftentimes that's for us too, that sometimes the punishment that comes from our parents often holds higher than anything else. And so we don't want to be disowned. We don't want to be a black sheep in our family, right? That's a terminology and a phrase used to say that you're ostracized, that you're this outcast in the family. But in this all, being able to help understand that the law, it was so integrated in them, but this letter of the law was so integrated in them that it induced fear. And the reason why they would put loyalty higher above than anything else to the family is because they were scared. They were scared of what the consequences were, and they probably had seen, and over time had seen many people that they received some kind of punishment because they decided to go against their parents. But then what we see, the commitment that Jesus says, is that following Jesus is the highest priority. Now, in this, I wanted to unpackage what Jesus was saying in hate. And so when it says Jesus was saying to the people, it should be like you hate your father, your mother, your sister, your brother, your wife. It is a Hebrew expression for loving less. And so he's not saying that you should hate them. And probably a couple of chapters before this, there was the Beatitudes, and he said, if you hate anyone in your heart, it's like murdering them. And so Jesus is not contradicting himself, but he is making this distinction where he's saying that you should love your family less than you love me. And this isn't, again, a charge for us to hate our family. This is not a charge to consider them and put them way low on the pole and say, family, I don't even know you, you don't exist to me. But the whole charge here that Jesus had for his people is that you should love God more than anything else. You should love me as your rabbi. You should love me as the Son of God more than anything else. And the interesting thing is that he doesn't leave out any relationships within the family. He talks about the father, the mother, the wife, the children, the brothers, the sisters. And so it's no part of the family that we are supposed to love more than God. And as that happens, one of the things what happens in that hierarchy, or if you were to think about it, prioritization, is that everything else should follow after them. So if you have God as the highest priority, then everything else should follow after. And what does this allow us to do? First, we would take God for his word on what it means and its design in family. That if we were to put God as the priority, then we would look at all the other relationships under that in regards to what God has to say about it. If you put your parents at the top, then you would look at your parents to now dictate, and you would make your relationships, everything under that, in accordance to what your parents have to say. And so what God is doing here, what Jesus is doing here, is that he's placing himself at the top to help us to understand that every other relationship then should be looked to me and understood. And it is ultimately God who instituted the family, as I said earlier on in the introduction. And because of that, we should be able to be comfortable, or we should look at God to be able to dictate how we should communicate, how we should relate with, how we should be with our family. And one of the things that happens is when we don't prioritize our relationship with Jesus and we prioritize other relationships above that, we start idolizing those things. So now you will look to your mom, your dad to give you your identity. You would do everything that they say to do because everything rides or it will die with what your parents have to say, instead of what God has to say about it. And then it would start to create rifts in the family, because if you are putting that as the priority, the relationship with the parents or these things, and you're looking to two sinners or one sinner to be able to dictate how you should live your life, then there's going to be, of course, brokenness that comes out of it. And you're not going to be willing to live the way that God desires for you in those relationships, but you would be creating continual brokenness upon brokenness when it comes to that relationship with your parents. And so when we look at Jesus and when he shares about these things, I don't want us to think that for one moment that the whole point of it all is that Jesus is saying, hey, you should not care about your family, just follow me. And even if your parents hate you and they disown you, that's okay. Like, I'm Jesus, and that's the only thing that matters, you and me, and we're going to go on a sunset ride, and that's all that is going to be to it. But no, he's putting this before us to help us to prioritize, help us to understand, help us to know where the things in order of where they should be, and then to be able to properly respond. I love what Billy Graham says, and this is one of his quotes. He says, we need to place God at the center of our family. As a family, we need to walk with God daily. And I pray that what we would see in our church, what we would see in the parent-children relationship, as you communicate, as you relate, as you're communing with your family, with your parents, for some of us, our children, that it would be in a place where what we care most about is that we care about their relationship with God. We care that that person would be able to put God at the center, and as a family unit, to be able to walk daily in the things he has called us to. And so for us, I'm wondering where we're at. Have we placed our family at the top, or have we misplaced them too much to the bottom? That maybe in light of everything, we have not understood God's design for family, and therefore we've been living in our relationship with our parents, in our relationships with our children, in a way that is dishonoring to God and ultimately leads to brokenness. And so what is the way that we are to respond to Jesus being priority? What is the response we should have to the priority? And I just want to speak into how we should engage now. What does engaging with our parents when Jesus is our priority look like? What does it look like for parents to engage with their children? And I'm speaking into a lot of our futures, I hope, that we won't tune out when I'm talking about this, so that we would have a good theological foundation, so that when many of us do have children, that we will be able to approach it in a way and submit and surrender our children to God too. So I'm going to start off with the parents. What are the parents' ways to engage with children? First, it's teaching. That's one of the responsibilities of a parent. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 6 to 7, if you could read the highlighted sections with me. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. And so this whole thing is that your whole life, it should be a teaching of God's commandments, of who God is to the children. And I know many of us, maybe we didn't experience that actually when your parents were teaching you, they were teaching you different ideologies or different ways to live your life. That when they walked by their way and they did their thing, you didn't see Christ in them, but you saw maybe a depiction of a false god. That their whole lifestyle did not exude Christ, but what it exuded was actually maybe this God that they did or they didn't believe in was never communicated to you. And in many ways, that Jesus wasn't seen through their life. And one of the things that needs to happen in this parent-child relationship is that teaching is supposed to happen, but the right teaching God's commandments. Secondly is training. In Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6, it says, train, okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. And so teaching and training is a little bit different. When I think about teaching, mainly it's sometimes through words and maybe the way that someone lives their life. But training is that actually the person is integrating their life with yours and actually helping you to develop and grow in different areas. And one of the things that I'm really grateful for is that my parents, what they trained me in is to read the Bible and to be curious about the Bible. And I remember early on, we would have these family times that my dad would lead us into reading the Word. And this is one of the responsibilities of a parent, is to train the children up in the way that he should go, that it should be biblically sound and based. And what are the things, the habits, the disciplines that are being taught to the child? Third is disciplining. And so in Proverbs 13, verse 24, it says, "Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but who loves him is diligent to discipline him." Amen, amen. Thank you for participating. But yes, there's this diligence that we need to discipline. And when the child does wrong, that we are quick to correct. And we don't do it because we feel great about it, like, oh, like let's send them to their room and they can never come out. Or in those times they would use something called a rod. And so that was a stick and there was physical discipline. But actually it was through that physical discipline that when they were especially young, that they would learn well what to do and what not to do. And this is a loving act. And some of us, and I know this is true for myself, that I receive everything more as a punishment from my parents. And so I always thought, oh, I did wrong and therefore I am punished, rather than looking at it and knowing my parents' heart. And maybe they could have done that a little bit better of reminding me why they were disciplining me. But oftentimes I didn't see it as discipline. It was more of a punishment. But I hope that we would not shy away, even in the future, of disciplining our children, because this is how we're going to help them and correct them. And for many of us who are parents, to continually to be able to discipline and show them what is right. Fourth is respecting. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 21, it speaks to fathers. So fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged. So do not provoke. Sorry. I love it. But do not provoke your children. But I feel like the essence of that is not just for us to not make them angry or for the children not to be angry, and that's what we're not supposed to do. But it's also to help them to know that they are respected. And so how do we relate with our children? Or even for some of us, as we're thinking about some of these things that have been listed out, have our parents done this for us? Or maybe they haven't. And maybe there's gaps in what we've been able to learn or what we haven't. And I hope that ultimately we would be able to relearn and rethink about these things and reimagine what that parent-child relationship could be like. And then lastly is providing. So in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8, it says, "But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." In Proverbs chapter 13, verses 22, it says, "A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the sinner's wealth is laid up for the righteous." So in both of these things, you see this aspect that parents are supposed to provide for their children. They're supposed to be able to provide food, clothing, the necessities of life, but not only that, to be providing emotional support, to be there as a spiritual mentor and a guide. And I'm wondering for all of us, how many of these things are maybe missing, and what kind of pains did that bring about? What are some things that have hurt us because we realize our parents have not helped us to grow up in these ways? And then also acknowledge the good that your parents have done. Maybe they did teach you and they disciplined you and they helped you to be pointed in the right direction. What are the things that they have trained you up in, and that's why you are the person you are today? What are the things that they have provided for you? that it's even through them that God has provided for you personally. And then to be able to look into the children's way to engage with parents. The first aspect is obeying. In Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1, it says, Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Colossians chapter 3, verse 20, it says, Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. So as children, we are to obey our parents. I'm gonna take some of the questions we might be asking. Like, when is the age that we're supposed to stop maybe obeying our parents if we feel like it's against our conscience? Is it just when we get married, or is there an age cutoff when that happens? And so I'll address those things a little bit later, but it is a responsibility, it is a role for the child to play to be able to obey the parents, because it is also seen that the parents that we have, as much as it might be hard to see, is that God has actually put them in your life for a purpose and a reason. And secondly is honoring. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 2 to 3, it says, Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. This actually derives and comes out of the 10 Commandments, and it is the only commandment and the first and only commandment that it is given with a promise. The Hebrew word here for honor, it means respect, esteem, and highly regard them, to set them apart and count them as distinguished. That a lot of the things that they've done for us is something that has been things that are respect worthy, that we should respect our parents, to honor them in different ways. And it is also not only an emotional sense. When you look at it into the Hebrew, it means that the children would actually provide concrete gifts for the parents. Now, I mean, if it's beyond your means, maybe be mindful of that. But we are to take care and to provide for our parents, especially as they get older too. And so these are the two things that we should be doing as children in this parent-child relationship. Now, I know that some of these things, if you take it too far down one road and you forget about the priority that Jesus should have, then we might end up, it could look like, oh, we should just do everything our parents say. But I want to take a step back from that and also just address some of the questions in the child-parent relationship. So when is a child allowed to stop obeying his parents? And for me, I was just wrestling with this, and I was thinking about it, and I was just, like biblically, it doesn't really say what the cutoff point is. Like, oh, if you're 25 years old, you are now allowed to not obey everything your parents say. We do see two scriptures along with this. And so Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, it speaks about man and woman coming together to become one flesh, and then they are to leave their father and their mother and to form a new family. And then Numbers 30, it actually talks about the age 20 where people are accountable for their actions before God. Now, of course, these are all, it could seem arbitrary, and there's maybe cultural reasons why God had placed the age of 20 in the Numbers passage. And maybe for some of us, we might be called to celibacy. And so what if I never get married? Then do I constantly just obey my parents only? Or we might get married much later on in our lives. And so how does that relationship work? And I believe that we have to go back to, one, what is our priority? But then two, how do we honor our parents? If we know that Jesus, maybe in our wrestle with some of the decisions we're making, maybe some of us are in the middle of this, that we want to stay in Hong Kong, but our parents keep saying, hey, come back to Malaysia, come back to Indonesia, come back to Korea, come back somewhere, come back to the US. But how do we navigate those things? And how do we able to how are we able to talk with our parents in an honoring way? Now, if we really do believe it is God that is leading us and guiding us, then being able to obey his voice first and foremost is important. But in how we interact with our parents then, and we get to that decision and we talk to them through that decision, we should use honor to think about how do we honor them. And sometimes that's going to be through communication. And maybe they're going to get emotionally charged, but even on our end, not to yell back, not to fight back, but just say, hey, like, Mom, hey, Dad, I'm here and I feel like this is what God is asking me to do. And I know it's against your wishes, but I hope that you could understand. And sometimes when we bring our emotions or just everything about ourselves into it where it's not of God, we oftentimes give them even opportunities to say, hey, like, you know, you're as charged up as I am, and why do you firmly believe in these things? And so I think being able to have those conversations is so important, and to be able to honor them in that way. Secondly is, do we always need to honor our parents? And what does this mean? And when we look into Scripture, actually, biblically, we are to honor our parents for the rest of our lives, that we are not ever not to honor them. It is one of the 10 commandments, and it doesn't get removed all of a sudden and become the 9 commandments when you're at the age of 30. It just stays the 10 commandments for the rest of your life. And so how do we navigate and think about that? I would say one of the best ways to honor them is, are we praying for them? If I were to ask us, when's the last time we've prayed for our parents? Maybe some of us have been so preoccupied with life that we haven't done that. Secondly is encourage them. And encouraging them does not just mean that we give them warm words of affirmation, but encouraging them is also pointing them to the truth. And so maybe they're saying something and you realize, actually, biblically, it's not aligned. And of course, I'm speaking about this in a way where it's more, you're talking to believing parents. But being able to talk with them and say, hey, like, actually, you're using this scripture against me, but what would you say about this? And being able to have that conversation and point them to the truth too. For maybe parents who are pre-Christians that don't know Jesus, a part of it is just being able to share our lives with them, and it will encourage them to actually want to get to know Jesus too. That's the end goal, that they would know and have salvation. The end goal is not to try to get your own way or make your own decisions for yourself. But the end goal is always, if my parents are not believers, I want them to have the salvation. I want them to receive this gospel that can transform their life. And the last one is just similar, to point them to the truth. And so lastly is, how should we navigate child-parent relationships? I believe it's very simple that both parties should honor and respect each other. That even as you look to your parents, or even as for many of us in the future, if we have our own kids, we should be honoring or respecting our children. But this takes trust and being able to build trust. Sometimes your parents have seen you through seasons where you have been very immature. And so when you're making these big decisions about life, I'm going to stay in Hong Kong, they're going to be wondering to you, like, you sure about that? Like, you weren't able to even cook instant noodles for yourself. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to tell me that you're going to make this big decision and live by yourself? But trust needs to be built. And this is where it's so important to share your journey too. Being able to share about how God is working in your life and being able to have communication with them and showing consistency. Sometimes Korean gets on my case for this, but whenever I go back to New York, sometimes it's very easy to go back to my old ways. But I promise, more than before, like I'm doing the dishes, I'm trying to help out, I'm doing whatever I can. But at times it is very easy. Oh, mom will just take care of that. Or, well, mainly it was my mom throughout my life. But how can I show whenever I go back that this gospel, this thing I'm living for, is something that actually has transformed my life? And if you're not communicating that, I would say it's important to regularly call and check up on your parents. I feel like there's somewhere in the middle that's healthy. If you're calling them every single day for 2 hours, I'm not sure if how much you could do with your own life. But then I think there's another side which I fall prey to often is that I call maybe once every like 3 months. And so there's a healthy middle to that. And I've been trying to do better, just calling my parents and letting them know how I'm doing. But this is a great way just to build rapport and to let them know that you care, that you're not actually trying to run away from them when you're telling them, I'm making this decision, but I'm doing this because I'm actually following God, but I love you and I want to invite you into my life. B is love. And this is hopefully with the kind of love that Jesus fills us with. But it takes love. It takes you being willing to forgive your parents when you've been hurt. It takes love when your child is causing a ruckus and making your life miserable, to be able to forgive them and still care for them. It takes love to be able to show and encourage them and actually take action to tangibly love them. And so it takes love, and it takes us being able to say, hey, as I've received from Christ, I want to be able to share this with my parents. And then lastly is care. And to show genuine care for your parents. I know it could seem a little bit similar to love, but just when I think about care, it's when we understand a person's need and we're able to meet it. And so if you know that your parents are having a hard time with certain things, like maybe getting around the house or moving outside and being able to walk comfortably. I feel like most parents would say, oh, like, don't buy me anything, don't do this for me. But I'm sure they want, if you do it for them, they would be so ecstatic and happy. You can ask some of the parents in this room later. But being able to just care for them and meet their needs. And similarly, when we're interacting with our future children or children now, being able to think about how can I care for them, meet their need, even though they're not asking for it. And I genuinely believe if we're able to build trust, build love, build care, that it's going to help us navigate that child-parent relationship. But more than that, what's going to be most important is that we continue to prioritize God. That when God is at the center, when we're looking to God and asking Him to lead us, He's going to actually help us to know how I should go about this relationship with my parent. Maybe for a time period, you're going to have to stay away because there was such pain and hurt, and there was such verbal, even physical abuse, that separating yourself for a while physically might be important. But as you're listening to Jesus, then He might say, hey, take that step to call them. And you call them. And you just start having a relationship and building rapport. And you apologize for maybe some of the ways that you've acted or you weren't helpful. And of course, you don't expect your parent, your child to do the same always. But in that the gospel will be able to be lived out and there could be reconciliation. So I believe that even as we think about the ways we engage with our parents, the ways we will engage with our children, and we are engaging with children. That if we're able to look first and foremost to our main priority being God, main priority being Jesus' way, He will lead us and guide us. And He has already guided us through His word. And the gospel is this, that Jesus looked down on us and He said, these are the people that I want a part of my family. But He knew that there was a severed relationship, that there is this relationship that was broken because we had sinned. But He showed us the most unconditional love, that even though we didn't desire or we didn't want to have a relationship with Him, He made it possible. That He came, He died on the cross, He bled, He died the sinner's death so that He could repair and reconcile our relationship with Him. And as we see that work on the cross, it reminds us that no matter what pains I've gone through, no matter what hardships I've gone through, that I could pour out that same love to people, that I could pour out that love to my parent who might have hurt me. I could pour out that love to my child who might have distanced himself, herself. That I could care for them, and I could be genuine and authentic in that. So the one thing, again, is when we make Jesus the priority, we will approach our relationship with our family honorably. Just have two next steps for us. The first one is pray for your family. And we'll do that together later. I just want us to be able to pray for our own family, pray for each other's family. I know that all of us, we've probably experienced many different things over our lives in light of our family. But I do believe that this is God's intended purpose, this family unit, for actually us to experience His love in a profound way. And secondly is commit to loving your family. And I don't know what this is going to look like for you. Maybe for some of us, you don't have your family here right now. And so that just means that this week you take time to call them. That even though it's going to maybe be an awkward conversation, that you say, I'm willing to put myself in that awkwardness. So I could just say, hey, Dad, hey, Mom, I care for you. And maybe it goes 30 seconds and you're just like, thanks, dude. And then they hang up. But take that first step. Just commit to loving them. Commit to honoring them in that way. Maybe for some of us, it means that we bring something home. Maybe a gift that they wanted if they're here in Hong Kong. Whatever it is, just commit to one tangible action this week to love your parents.
Thank you for listening to the Harvest Mission Community Church podcast. For more information, visit our website at hongkong.hmcc.net.